Got an interesting video going on. You guys can't see it, but some of you are in it right now, so I'm going to change the focus. We couldn't do it until it was going. And then lock and zoom. Perfect. All right. Rocky, we're going to do our presentation now. It is Haunted Oregon. It's more than just Oregon City. Rocky is a paranormal investigator and historian with expertise around the state. And so we've broadened it because if you've already heard about the ghosts of Oregon City, you're now going to hear about ghosts in Oregon City and the rest of the state, including Seaside, I believe. There's a few ghosts there. All right, thank you. Take it away, Rocky.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we're going to talk about Oregon City, of course, a little bit. And the other thing is, even if I talk about somewhere else, it's tied to Oregon City, okay? So I'm Rocky. I am a teacher at Oregon City High School. I see at least one student out there in the audience. And I am a city commissioner, and I've lived in Oregon City my whole life. I am just obsessed with Oregon City's history. And that kind of started from high school. I was a student at Oregon City High School in the mid-90s, and that was during 1993. 1994 was the sesquicentennial of the Oregon Trail and the city's sesquicentennial. And as a high school student in Oregon City, I was trying to figure out why people would come to this town. Now remember, that's when we were building the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center. It was supposed to open those 2 years and it never did. It did eventually, but it got delayed. And the whole point of the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center was to open on the sesquicentennial of the end of the Oregon Trail. And it didn't open until 1995. And, but people were coming into this city. People were coming into this city because of the amazing history here. And when you live in a town your whole life, you say, well, really? I didn't know the history that much of this town at that point. But I really started learning it. And I started a small business because I am an artist and teach art at the high school. I decided I didn't want to get a real job in high school. Some of students know that. We all know what that's like when your parents say you have to get a job. So I started printing t-shirts and I started selling things, Oregon City t-shirts and Oregon City coloring books. And that's what I did. And I worked for the Chamber of Commerce and I worked for the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center. And then I got a job at the Ermitinger House. I worked at the Atkinson Church. All the places I ended up working were haunted. And I didn't plan that. I was always interested in Halloween, and I just worked at Oaks Park. I worked at a lot of places. And so I really became interested in local history. And then I became really interested in ghost stories and really interested in connecting the history of the things I knew to these ghost stories. And that kind of happened through people coming into the Ermitinger House wanting to know about the ghosts, or actually paranormal groups at the time, which I didn't really know was a thing. Paranormal groups investigating the city and saying, oh, they bring a scientist and they bring paranormal investigators and they bring psychics and would walk around Oregon City. And I would, on a couple of those walks, and they would say, oh, sometimes they'd get to a corner and say, oh, something bad happened here. And I would sometimes able to say, well, I know exactly what happened there, and this is what happened, and this is why you're feeling this. And that is something I could not stop. I've been obsessed with it. Part of the issue was I promised the spirits at the Ermitinger House that I would tell their story. And I've been telling them ever since. And then I realized there's a far many more spirits that want their story to be told. So that's what I do, and I really enjoy it. So those of you that have not been on a tour of mine or listened to my talk, I try to cram. They say, oh, well, like an hour and a half. I said, well, can we do 2 hours? And then I push that because I got too much. So I will talk as long as I can until they throw me outside, which they're gentle. And then I'll be out in the park if you want to talk to me till a little later, okay? And if that's not enough and you have to go home, you can go on one of my tours. I'll tell you about that. All right. Here's what I wanted to start off. I will start off with Oregon City, but I wanted to start off with this question. So we are talking a little about, I don't always talk about the investigation part. I talk a lot about the stories and research. Why is a place haunted? That's a question that people ask. Why is a place haunted? And that's a big word, right? That's a big phrase or question because I don't know what the word haunted means. And I don't know what the word ghost means. So people say, do you believe in ghosts? I say, I don't know. And they find that odd, but you have a belief in what you think a ghost is, and you have a definition of what you think a ghost is. It's different than mine, maybe. It might be the same. So in paranormal investigation, investigators are using tools that are frequently not made for investigating paranormal, right? Because there really isn't believe it or not, there really isn't a ghost detector that detects ghosts. Okay, now it may be called that, and it may be, advertised as that, but what it really comes down to is you're using scientific tools to find energy readings or, electromagnetic fields, or you're recording, audio or sound. So those are the tools you find. Then it's more about trying to eliminate things that we know. Like, oh, there's an energy in this room. I have a bad feeling in this room. Well, it's because there's a huge electrical box there and it's sending out all this energy. Okay, so once you realize, oh, well, why am I picking up this energy here? There's nothing here. And then you can start trying to figure out, is there something else? But it's very hard to say, yeah, there's absolutely ghosts here, right? It's almost impossible. That's why it's still a mystery. Okay, so knowing all that, what makes Oregon and the Northwest such a haunted place? It's a big question. Oregon is, kind of dark and dreary. It adds to that atmosphere of the paranormal. So that's one thing. There are a lot of theories on why people think places are haunted. That doesn't mean that that's why they're haunted. It's people think they're haunted because of these things. And places that have more paranormal activity or energy or feelings or whatever you want to say. Why? Why do those happen? And there actually is a series of things that I think add to that. Okay. Now, just because we say there's paranormal activity there doesn't necessarily mean the place is haunted. It could be just energy coming from something else that is stirring things up. But the reason people believe energy is tied to spirits is because how do spirits do something? If they can do something, they have to get the energy from somewhere to do it. And so that's the reason that connection's there in terms of people believing that that's what causes it, okay? So we're gonna go through this pretty fast. Running water, bodies of water, or waterfalls. Some of the most haunted places are surrounded by water, okay? And why is that? What does water do? Water causes energy. Water can affect a lot of different kinds of things. The temperature, it can affect all sorts of different things in the atmosphere. There is it's foggy, all those kind of things, right? So that's one thing to think about. Also, as I'm going through this list, realize that some of these things, one city may have one of those things. As we go through this list of things, think about Oregon City, okay? We're surrounded by waterfalls and water in this town, okay? So that checks off the first one in Oregon City. Geology. Geology can cause different things with various readings and things. That's another one that Oregon City has. By the way, Oregon City has all these, okay? The age of the place, okay? I felt like I was giving a great compliment. I had a group on my tour a couple of months ago, and they were all from Italy. And there were high school kids from Italy, and they said, I never knew this place had so much history. And I thought, well, that's a compliment, right? Because this history is not that big, not that huge of a history here, right? So the older the place, the more history can cause a longer imprint of things happening, right? Catastrophe or tragedy. Has this city seen that? A lot, okay? And other haunted places we know are connected sometimes to that. I don't think that always means a place is haunted, but what is the energy that is left from that occurrence? Or the energy and the emotional impact that event has on a town? That in itself can cause things. Violence or murder. Oregon City has never had, no. We have some issues with that sometimes, right, in our history, as many cities do. Confined space or the reuse of space, okay? Think of a town that's a small town that grows into a big city, and you have multiple buildings that are rebuilt over the same place multiple times, okay? Or built close together or something like that. That can cause, meaning if something happened in this one place and that place is destroyed and something else is built there, does that old place or what happened in that old place still affect that place? It does, or a lot of times it does. Relocation or movement. Buildings that are built and then moved down the street. Or buildings that are moved and moved up the hill. Or not just buildings. People that are buried and then dug up and moved across the city and buried again, and sometimes then dug up and buried again, like Dr. McLaughlin. Okay? Oregon City has that issue? Yes. Sacred sites, and I mean primarily Native American sites and other places of ritual and spiritual places. Does Oregon City have that? Absolutely. Railroad tracks and trains. Now that's an odd one, but what is that about? It's about energy, right? I don't know if you've ever stood down by Singer Falls or on the tunnel when a train comes by. It stirs stuff up and there's an energy there. And then there's a lot of paranormal activity that happens in those areas. Now, whether or not is that really paranormal activity or is it just the activity from the train going by? So that's all the things to ask. That's my list. And now that list is taken from other lists, but that's a pretty conclusive list. I'm sure there's other issues, right? But the reason I go through that sometimes is because not all cities have those. And I say Oregon City has every one of those, and sometimes to a high level, okay? So let's talk about this place, Haunted Oregon City. We're not gonna talk about Haunted Oregon City a lot today because hopefully you'll go on a tour sometime and I talk about Haunted Oregon City because every year here a lot. We'll talk a little bit about Oregon City, Willamette Falls. So we have the main history of Oregon City is the main, a lot of Native history here in Oregon City. You have three main themes in Oregon City. You have the Native story, you have the Hudson Bay Company story, and McLaughlin and him coming to this area in the Hudson Bay Company, and then you have the pioneer end of the Oregon Trail story. Those are not to say that there isn't other stories here, obviously, but those are the three ones that really this town is affected by in a great deal, and it still is something that we talk about all the time. Ermitanger House, right across the street. This is where I started in terms of trying to get to know the paranormal world and the things there. I know you're gonna be shocked. I'm not gonna tell you a story about the Ermitanger House today. And that's so hard to do, okay? So after this, if you wanna go walk over there, I'll tell you about the Ermitanger House, okay? Holly's here tonight too. She's in the back seat and works for the city and is the docent or the guide at the Ermitanger House. One of the best, coolest, and most amazing places in this town, okay? Francis Ermitanger worked for the Hudson Bay Company. And I've spent a lot of time in that house and outside that house. It's a very important place for me. McLaughlin House. Oh, what is the second oldest house in the city? Okay, next to Ermitaño. McLaughlin House we'll talk just briefly about tonight because I want to connect it to another. If you ask me what is the most haunted place, I say this on the tour sometimes, what's the most haunted place in Oregon? I don't know. What is the most haunted place in Oregon City? That question is loaded because it comes down to the person that's answering it to think, well, what do I think is the most haunted place? And it's going to be the place that I've had the most experience in. So that's a weird question to ask people. If you look up haunted places in Oregon, a lot of times what comes up, I wonder if you look up haunted mansion in Oregon, what's going to come up? The McLaughlin House is going to come up, or the Pittock Mansion. Okay, so those are the two haunted mansions of Oregon that I think. One, the 1800s version of Oregon's haunted mansion, and then the 1900s version of Oregon's haunted mansion. I hate to tell you, they're not that haunted. The Pittock Mansion is haunted, but there are far other places more haunted than those, sometime within the same block. Okay? All right, so McLaughlin House. We won't talk about all the McLaughlin history, but when I referenced, the movie The Graves, that has a lot to do with McLaughlin. I talk about it being as Oregon's original haunted mansion. All right. I don't know if they like me calling it that, but I'm not really serious about it. I love Disneyland. So there you go. I also love the connections that sometimes people don't see. There's a lot of roses in this room. Okay, you'll hear a theory of roses. Then you talk about Pittock Mansion. There's a lot of connections between this place called Oregon City and Portland. Okay, and we seem to think a lot of it's Portland's history. It's Oregon City's history. Okay, Stevens Crawford House. I don't get to talk about it very much. It's just right next side of the side of the Ermitaño House. So let's talk about Stevens Crawford House, because the last few years has been a pretty big change at the Stevens Crawford House. Every time there is a different director or a different volunteer group, there's different ways of operating a building and a museum. People didn't talk about, and actually I think this is true for a lot of museums and a lot of government facilities, they don't want to talk about ghosts, okay? And if they do talk about ghosts, they're very careful about it. Sometimes they've been told not to talk about it. That always bothered me. And it bothered me because, especially with museums, if you're in a museum and your whole purpose of that museum is to talk about the history of the place, and that history is happening there still because of something that happened in that house, then aren't you not doing your job? Like, that's part of the history of that place. And not only is it part of the history of that place, it makes the history so much more interesting. And wanting to find out, why is this happening? Why is this happening? So the last few years, the Stevens Crawford, I remember one of the first years, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, Stevens Crawford House called me, said, we want to do a ghost tour and an investigation. Now, it's one thing to do a ghost tour in a city building or a museum that's owned by an organization. It's a far different thing to do that and a paranormal investigation. Okay, because that's really getting into a little bit more depth of rather than just telling a story. Clearly that meant they might have things going on at the Stevens Crawford House that no one's ever talked about. But also part of having a paranormal investigation is to know, is there anything happening there at all? Even if there hasn't been anything. And so in the last 3 or 4 years, we've done multiple events at the Stevens Crawford House. And they've been very successful and interesting. One, finding out news stories, but also learning more about the Stevens Crawford House and the family that lived there. Harley Stevens and Mary Stevens came on the Oregon Trail. They got married. They were both in business, owned properties, real estate, different things. In fact, most of this blocks surrounding this whole house was theirs. That's why this building's here. It's why the church is there. they gave these properties or sold these properties to things that they liked. And so they owned all of this area, right? And so their house is still there. Murdy Stevens and Harley Jr. were their two children. And then what we know of the Stevens Crawford house is mostly Murdy Stevens, because she ended up living in her parents' home much until until the end of her life. And she died, I think, 96, something around there. So it's an amazing house. Clock is stopped at 10:30. That's the time that he died. That's the time that Harley died. So if you still go into the lobby or into his office in the front of the house, that clock stopped right at that time. Not to say the clock stopped when he died. That would be amazing. I don't think that's the case. I think they know that the time he died, they set the clock to that to keep it there. All right. I try not to add to stories that aren't ghost stories. I try to be pretty careful with what is a real story and what's, all right. We're gonna go through this pretty quick. The thing that I love about this place is over time, the rooms were set up for different exhibits that didn't really match the original house. A lot of the things in the house are of the house, meaning the family collected things. Murdy and her parents collected things. Murdy's father collected a lot of Native American things from this town, and we'll just use the word collected. There was a lot of collection that Murdy's mother had. In fact, as her friends said, she left, because since she lived a pretty long life as well, she was like the curator of things of Oregon City, because there wasn't a museum then. And so as her friends and family died, she kept their stuff and she started storing stuff. And she became a person that collected lots of things, okay? And her house was completely filled to when, that went to Murdy as well, right? And then Murdy continued that collection. But the rooms were set up kind of as displays of history more so than the house really was at one time. And one of the things they really wanted to do in the last 4 or 5 years is to give Murdy a place. Because when Murdy passed away, and they set up the house, the Murdy deeded the house to the Clackamas County Museum and left everything to that. That's why it's part of the museum today. But this room was set up as a nursery. And there were no little kids that grew up in that house. It was, so the nursery, because the museum had a collection of all these toys and wanted to show what a nursery would look like. So eventually they're like, no, Murdy needs her own place. And this is her house. And so they had some of the furniture from her room that was set up down the hallway to make it look like a room, and they moved it into her room. And then they took some of her drawings and they put them up on the walls. And then they realized that that door of the bedroom that had always been open, anytime anyone went up there to look through the house, and you probably remember years ago there was strings across the doorways where you couldn't even go into the rooms. They want people to go in the rooms, right? So those doors are open so you can go into the rooms, and now you go up the stairs and the door is closed. That door closed. Now it won't close necessarily all the way, but it'll close gently so that it's it's my time. She's taken that room. That's her space, and she knows it. She's happy that there's a space there, and the people at the Stevens Crawford house firmly believe that now that she has her own space, there's sometimes that she's like, hey, the door's closed and I'm here. Because that didn't happen, or at least wasn't documented as much as it was before they made that change. And so it's a great story in the sense of a lot of places give the house back in some ways, or some places in the house back to the spirits. If I ever get to Port Gamble tonight on this topic, but I doubt I will because I'm adding a lot of stuff tonight that I don't normally, so we don't know where we're gonna get. A lot of houses leave places where there's a sign that says this room's off limits, or this closet's off limits, or this hallway's off limits. Why? Because it's theirs. It's their space. And usually people, we respect that, right? All right. There's been a woman's figure seen at the end of the hallway in the Stevens Crawford on the second floor. There's been footsteps heard. Footsteps that are coming down the hallway that are heard from the first floor when no one's there. And then another story of they did a gallery. They did kind of an art exhibit there where the artist was going to use one of the rooms as a gallery area and a studio space. And then she immediately, after a couple days, asked to move into a different room because that door also was closing. When she went up to go get it, she would find the door closed. And then when she was working in that studio, she would hear footsteps coming down the hall saying they were coming to come check on me or coming to look at me or whatever. And so she kind of said, I don't want to be in that room. The room she was working in is rooms to the right, what would be behind the camera. The room that bothers me the most, and pretty much everyone else the most, is the door to the left in the hallway there. And that is this bedroom here. Why is that the room that bothers everyone? It has an energy. You walk in it, you feel this energy, it's a heaviness, it's a, I don't know how to explain it, but I'm pretty good at going into a place and say, oh my gosh, this is a problem. This room has issues. I feel it. And sometimes I can narrow it down to the a couple feet. I was in the Heathman Hotel. That hotel is known for being very haunted. And there was one corner in the kitchen that I said, I feel something right here. And they said, that's where we see this guy of the whole hotel, right? So, open up yourself when you go to places, and when you think something's weird, you're telling yourself something, right? Now, could there be other things with that room that are causing energy too? Yes, but here's what I think is really interesting. To the left of that room is a closet, and it's a closet within a closet because there's a closet, and then there's another space beyond the closet that's a closet, and it's really creepy. It's heavy. It's a place that you don't really want to stay in long. And a lot of people think that because of the family's collection of other things and things, that the collection also has energy, meaning objects from the family and objects from other people that came into the house brought energy or spirits with it, okay? The other piece of this closet was, someone told me it was where Harley stored a lot of his collection. Also in the basement of the house. Well, I told you, a lot of his collection was native stuff from this area, okay? That he would find and dig up. And probably, I don't know, in those days, just know that people could dig up native graves and do things, and no one really did much about it. And it's pretty obvious when you read the newspapers, they would talk about finding graves on Main Street, and whoever owned the property said, well, we found bones and we found relics and beads, and so we will keep them, because I own this property. Not to say that he did that, but it's hard to know. That was the time that they lived in. So we think that there are places in that house where you get a feeling of some of that past. And what was amazing is, as of a few years ago, the attic of the house was never open to the public, and the basement was never open to the public. And on these events that we've done, they've let us open the attic and basement, and it's amazing, okay? The attic. I worked in the Ermitinger house, and I heard stories about the attic from a kid, and it was like, imagine the woman, here's what I imagined it as, the Goonies house attic, but for Oregon City, because that's what it was. Murdy had the city's collection of stuff in that attic. Hundreds and hundreds of trucks. This is only just a couple years ago. It still looks like that. They've gotten rid of so much stuff. And no one in the public had ever been really allowed to go up there as a tour. And it's incredible. And it's got some issues, right? There's some things that happen up there. There's two windows. This would be the window. This is the window here at the back of the Stevens Crawford House attic. And this is the window to the front facing the Pioneer Center. If you don't know, the Ermitinger has problems with the upstairs windows, or did, opening by themselves, okay? These are attics and places that people don't normally go very often. Now notice that this is the stairway up to the attic and all the stuff that's piled up here to get to that window, and know that this area was also stacked with chairs and stuff at one time. But people would drive by the Stevens Crawford's house and say the window's open in the attic. Well, no one had been there, and no one had been up there. And even if they had been up there, when they go up to the attic, they can't even get to the window without moving a half hour's worth of stuff to get to the window to close it. And then they close it, and then it happens again. So that's been an issue up there. The front window is where you can see the light. There's frequently on nights that I go by on tours where the light in the attic will be on, and frequently people do go up there. But you kind of watch that. It's like, well, if you see the light on in the attic of this house or a room, by the way, if you ever see a light on at the Barkley house, that's, those, you get to see a pattern of what is normal and what's not. And then if you see a light on, you say, well, who was in the house last night? And you know that no one's in these houses at night, almost ever. Even, when there's events, but sometimes so you want to check, well, was someone in the house yesterday? No one was in the house yesterday, well, how'd that light get on? And those kind of things. All right, we're gonna move faster here. This is the stairway to the basement of the Stevens Crawford house. And it's, again, a museum. In fact, Harley had opened it up as a museum to people and let the public come in, okay? Here's the first little Oregon City connection. Christopher Robbins, he was a Portland architect. He was the architect that designed the Stevens Crawford house, but he also designed the Hotel Oregon. Okay, Hotel Oregon in McMinnville is Hotel Elmerton, 1905, haunted as well. Okay, so that's the Oregon City connection to Hotel Oregon, haunted Hotel Oregon. It opened in 1905. And then third and fourth floors were added in 1912. It was a hotel for its life, and now it's the Oregon Hotel McMinimans. We'll talk about some of the McMinimans locations because I've worked in a lot of those areas as well. Became Hotel Oregon in 1932. I did the UFO festival out there, went out there for that, but there's some interesting ghost stories and paranormal stories in McMinnville, so I wanted to point that out. We'll talk about McMinimans, like I said, but there's several stories about the Hotel Oregon. One is of a little kid. They hear a little kid, or they hear kids laughing. The story is there's a little kid that they hear laughing up in the rooftop bar. There's a rooftop bar. Why there's a little kid ghost running around up there, I don't know. There is on a second floor painting, a painting of a little boy that grew up in the hotel in the 1950s, so a lot of people connect that to this little boy. That's the other great thing about McMinimans locations is the history is in that building. And you see, if the history is not in that building, the paintings and murals in the McMinimans buildings are telling you the story. And so you can usually look at those visuals in those McMinimans buildings, hotels, and restaurants and connect it right back to the history of that place, even in the Oregon City one. So I almost always tell people, don't just walk through the Kennedy School or these places, look at that place because the history's there. There is a ghost, a general ghost there named John. And so there's a reference to John. No one knows if that's his real name. That's the nickname, but there's a place, there's some tiles in the McMinimans that hint to the ghost of John. All right. Most of the ghost stories at Hotel Oregon are, and I usually stay away from some of those. I wanted to make that Oregon City connection, but sometimes people see shadows. Sometimes people hear noises, right? And sometimes that's it. I like to get a little bit more details than that. Okay, so we're gonna move on to some other ones. Haunted Portland. All right, we gotta talk about the Pittock Mansion. Part of why I think the Pittock Mansion always comes to the top of people's list of being haunted is because we'll look at it, right? It fits the part, and it doesn't help that, and when any time a scary movie films in Portland, that's the house, right? So there's multiple rarely horrible horror movies. Look it up online. I won't go through all, I have 15 slides about that. Timberline Lodge is the same way. The Shining, right? That image is out there. People see this on movie posters as a haunted house, and it's a haunted house, whether it is or not, right? And then you go and look into the history and say, well, there is some ghost stories about the Pittock Mansion, but does it really live up to its persona, right? I'm not sure it does. What's the Pittock Mansions connection? Henry Pittock. Henry Pittock comes to Oregon City area. He tries to get a job at an Oregon City paper. Portland was the suburb, right? We know this, okay? Oregon City had 5 newspapers. Portland was just getting started as a city. They didn't have a newspaper. Eventually they have the Oregonian.